then beyond that, I really do think there's something about tenant organizing that really gets to the core of the pressures on working class life right now.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Our next guest is Bhaskar Sunkara, president of The Nation magazine and founder of Jacobin. Bhaskar, thank you for taking the time to talk to us over in the UK right now.
Yeah. Just to explain to people that I'm not just, I'm not truly committed enough to be a 3 a.m.er, but I'm glad to wake up a little jet lagged. My laptop isn't working, so excuse the shakiness. But yeah, I think you guys are doing great work, and hope the fundraiser is going well so far.
Yeah, it is. So far, it raised $10,930. So doing pretty well. Pretty happy with that. And a little over halfway through. So if we could raise that again, that would be really great. But already, $11,000 is pretty good. And something like $1,200 in super chats on YouTube that are going to be going to the strike funds as well, obviously. So really happy with it. We actually just got off of. We just wrapped up a conversation with another fellow from the UK, but he's a native over there, John Dunn from the UK, who is part of the Orgrave Truth and Justice campaign. I'm not sure how familiar you are with UK politics, but had you heard of that campaign?
Only vaguely. I am kind of was very engaged during the Corbyn years, and obviously, Jackman publishes a lot on the on capital L labor politics in the UK, and then the broader movement that kind of emerged in the UK, very similar to what we had in the US with the kind of labor populist moment where their transit workers went on strike. They had other strikes, their communication workers, which in the UK are their postal workers, went on strike too. And there was a lot of, I think, fear in some parts of the left that, hey, strikes aren't super popular. Maybe people will resent disruptions in their train schedules or whatever else. And instead, there was a tremendous outpouring, a lot of support for those workers. I think we're seeing that now, where even if the labor movement is relatively weak in historic terms in the US and UK, there's a lot of popular support and enthusiasm now. And obviously that's why we need working class, media covering it.
Talking about the Labor Party and then the parallel over here in the United States, the Democratic Party. I wonder your thoughts on this. I posed something like this question to John over there, who was actually one of the people who was expelled from the Labor Party during the purge. He said he told us he was a 51-year member of the Labor Party, been paying dues to this organization for 50 years, and he was expelled because he liked a Facebook post, is what he said. And it's just really kind of amazing, that organization, what they are doing to its left flank, its labor, the labor flank of the Labor Party. And, we'll hear calls all the time for a Labor Party in the United States. I actually was at, I was a delegate to the Alabama AFL-CIO convention a couple of weeks ago, and there were a couple of delegates who were like, fuck the Democrats, fuck the Republicans, we need a Labor Party. And I was like, hell yeah, brother, that's I'm on board with that. But and unironically so, but they did that in the UK, and the Labor Party became, one of the two main parties, and it is now genuinely, in many ways, the Democratic Party now has more of a claim to be representative of the left and labor than the Labor Party, that has, it was constituted and is constituted by labor and by trade unions, and yet it has strayed even further than the Democratic Party. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I think that the Labor Party was what I guess Lenin once called kind of a bourgeois workers' party, right? It was never really a truly radical force, but it did have lots of radicals, lots of socialists within it. I mean, constitutionally, it's a socialist party. I would say that labor today, even under Keir Starmer, who's been awful, and who is, there's been selective expulsions of the left, but the effect of that is to demoralize the rest of the left. So everyone else who isn't expelled just ends up quitting. And I think this is a deliberate strategy. But I think even now the Labour Party does have these institutional connections to the trade union movement in certain areas. It still has a kind of working class roots in a way the Democratic Party doesn't have. At its peak, the Labour Party was an organization that, even when it was not particularly radical in the 40s and 50s, every single big tenement building in the UK would have a precinct, person who would whip the vote for the Labour Party. I mean, it really was a mass organization that you could plug into and be involved with. And obviously, the New Deal Democratic Party never was that. It was something that in certain cities, in certain instances, replicated some of that. But I don't think it rose to those heights, and it never delivered anything as impressive with the National Health Service. But today, it really is sad. I think you are right that the Labour Party's policies are less ambitious than even Joe Biden's policies. And some of that has to do with the UK's structural position, in the economy. It's quite a weak economy. And I think elites in the UK are favoring austerity, whereas elites in the US really wanted subsidies, were fine with fiscally expansionary policies to keep things rolling. But yeah, no, it's a tough situation. And I often wonder that question too. What's to prevent a Labour Party in the US eventually going down that route? I think the key thing is we need to conceptualize our role as building not just a workers' movement, but a workers' movement that is deeply politicized, that is connected with socialists and with other currents too, and that actually has a clear economic and social agenda. So in other words, we want to merge this workers' movement with a broader socialist movement. And eventually you should be able to look at both and not be able to see the difference. Whereas right now, obviously, we have a burgeoning workers' movement and we have a small kind of isolated groups of socialists. And obviously the goal is to have a socialist workers' movement.
Right. And what are some of the steps that you think that you would imagine needs to be taken, both in the U.S. and the U.K., to get from where we are now to there?
Yeah, I think the key thing is obviously we need to be agents of class struggle wherever we are, right? In our workplaces, in our communities, in our political parties. We're active political party. We're engaging in electoral efforts. The Democratic Social America, I think one of the best things it's done in recent years has been around tenant organizing. So this isn't just a mere kind of economism of just looking at our workplaces. And I think obviously this is a cliche. I hate to use this quote because it's used over and over again. But there was that old Eugene Debs line where he said that an organized socialist is a contradiction in terms. I think, people should join socialist organizations. I personally joined the Democratic Socialist America when I was 17 years old in April of 2007. And I don't regret that decision. There's obviously, it's gone through many different eras and iterations since then. But I do think it's really important that if you are committed to change, you just be involved with something. And even if you're not ready to call yourself a socialist or you don't like that label or identity, or you don't like something about DSA, I mean, there's plenty of ways to get involved in a myriad of different issues that are obviously all related to efforts towards solidarity and towards class struggle. But in my mind, the hotspots right now that we should be excited about are within organized labor. There's been obviously a leftward push. There's been attempts to kind of build up strike actions. And there's lots of solidarity work that even people like me, far away from the strategic industries, have been able to engage with. Then beyond that, I really do think there's something about tenant organizing that really gets to the core of the pressures on working class life right now.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
I think so too, and I agree that DSA has been doing some really good work. I finally bit the bullet and joined a few months ago. I've been a socialist for years now, but I am finally now a card-carrying socialist, and I did that in part because DSA. I'm much more of a paper member than I am anything else with relation to DSA, because most of my work is in the labor movement and doing union work, but it was in no small part because the Los Angeles branch did another run of those extremely cool jackets, and I figured if I was going to wear one that I should be a member. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that the left has historically not been good at, swag and design, and I think DSA has changed that a little bit. That's one thing that the Jacobin team, Remike Forbes and everyone at Jacobin has always done pretty well, because our goal was, it's hard enough to convince people to be a socialist. This is in 2010, 2011, USA. You might as well at least make it look like something that's approachable, even if the content still feels a little far field. And hopefully, in both DSA and Jacobin have pushed the left forward, at least in that aesthetic regard.
Yes, oh, absolutely. Yeah, I would say Jacobin has been brilliant in its artistic approach and being approachable to people. And there's Jacobin art hanging in my house, actually. And my wife is cool with that. Right? So that's
the important thing.
Hey, that's an accomplishment.
That's funny. Mine isn't with Jacobin art hanging in the house. I don't think I have any hanging in the house.
Oh no, what a bummer. I don't have any Jacobin art hanging in the house, but I do have a bunch of union art. But it's all relegated.
I do too. I have a bunch of labor Republican stuff, and then also even old Republican Party stuff. I have a big portrait of Ulysses S. Grant in the house and other stuff. So I think I spent my capital before I got a chance to put up any Jacobin posters.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely some posters that are still rolled up. You know what I mean? There's some posters that aren't making it on the wall. I've made peace with that. That's okay. But we'll tag them in at some point.
The one I haven't made peace with in my life is my John Starks dunk poster. Still sitting in my childhood bedroom. Haven't been able to get it back in the house. But that's one that's I think worth a battle over one day.
Oh, now you're a huge NBA fan, right?
Yeah. That's way too much of my spare time is spent watching the NBA.
Okay, so I'm just curious. You have any thoughts? I'm just gonna go ahead and hijack it right here, Jacob, and ask. What are your thoughts about the season? Is there any team that you're pulling for, or is there any team that you think really, is in the driver's seat this year?
Well, I'm a diehard Knicks fan, and I will be very satisfied with 45 wins. It's kind of the poverty of low expectations. The Knicks are really above average for the first time in a while, and I'm happy with that. Other than that, I don't have any sizzling takes. I think that it's the Celtics are really good in the East, and in the West, it is in my mind pretty hard to imagine a team beating out Denver. But I'm pulling as a neutral for Minnesota, even though just because I feel like Timberwolves fans are perhaps even more starved for victories than Knicks fans, and some sort of solidarity there. Actually, one of the few counties in American history to ever vote for a socialist was, I think, Lake County, Minnesota. I think a majority of people in Lake County, maybe there was a couple more counties, voted for Eugene Debs, during maybe the 1912 election. That used to be a hotbed of I guess there were probably iron workers up there and other mining workers were all leftists, and I don't know how I pivoted. See, immediately, even when I start talking about basketball, I kind of get to the old history of the workers' movement, also like what we're trying to rebuild, obviously, and that's part of what you all are doing too, which is I think creating a broader culture and apparatus where it becomes normal to think about politics and to think about the conditions that really shape our lives, because people often ask about Jackman's worldview and perspective, and why is it so focused on sometimes they use the word class reductionist, but what they really mean is like why, when they're not using it pejoratively, they're like, why is it so focused on the economy, right? And are you guys just Marxists who kind of use a very vulgar like, all right, only the economic base matters? But it's like, no, it shapes so much of our lives. Every single waking moment is determined by either trying to get money and that money not going far enough. And that's something that unites 60-70% of Americans are united by that struggle and concern. And it's just shocking that, obviously we live in a society with a big business section in the paper, but like no labor reporters in big national papers anymore.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
if you don't mind, Adam,
go ahead.
you mentioned that the transition from basketball into politics kind of seamlessly, and it made me think about a book that I read about a year ago by a Peter Kellman. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's a labor organizer up in Maine, and he wrote a book, "Divided We Fall: The Story of the Paper Workers Union," and he talked about how there was a real many flourishing of working class culture in paper making towns in the 1910s. In the 1910s, there was this huge wave of strikes, and they won big, and the unions controlled the towns and they controlled the mills in a lot of ways, and the union hall was the center of the town, and in the union hall they had plays and they had dances and they had sports competitions and things like this, and that's you mentioned that's kind of the world that folks like us would want to build towards, where on top of workers running the world, as we make the world run, we have roses too, right? And we are creating the entertainment for ourselves, and we are this centering ourselves in our community life, and he recounts after that how after the paper unions were really defeated and destroyed and eradicated in many places across the country, those union halls were replaced with company halls, and the company halls are what remain in paper towns today, and still bearing the name of paper trust barons. And the old union halls, long forgotten, demolished, abandoned, but the company halls have been renovated and are still in many cases like the center of the town. And it's a really kind of a sad illustration of American life in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and also how much of our working class history has just been lost. Like I was up in Troy, New York, I grew up in the Hudson Valley, and Troy is like a couple hours north, and I was up there doing some event or meeting with some leftists there, and I was just like, how many people do you think who are broadly political and show up to like local events, like even know that Troy used to have a socialist mayor, or even know like how many like Irish Americans in that area, there's still a big Irish American population around there, know that James Connolly himself, the hero of the Easter Rising in 1916, spent years in like Troy and Schenectady and these cities organizing rail workers. This was like such a huge part of American history, was the massive class struggle. Class struggle in the U.S. was so violent, especially unlike because it was capital was clearing out and expropriating all the resources of a continent, and they needed tons of cheap labor to do it, and they gave them dynamite, didn't pay them enough, and that was what defined life in the U.S. And obviously, so much of that history is lost, and even myself, when I think about what kind of society we want to build, what kind of movement we want to build, like, my first point of reference might be what German socialists were doing in the 1880s and 1890s, as opposed to what socialists here in America were able to do in the same period. So I think that a lot of that history is worth remembering, and it's not just kind of this radical Marxist socialist or anarchist tradition that was active in the U.S., but a long history of just egalitarian, like Christian socialism and other beliefs that were far from alien to the U.S. And obviously it took a very concerted propaganda campaign throughout the entirety of the Cold War to just convince people that socialism was something evil from the outside, as opposed to something that arises naturally from the contradictions and inequalities of day-to-day life under capitalism itself.
Right, absolutely. And something that you talked about that really resonates, and something, Jacob, as well, that you talked about, in terms of the working class culture and the culture in terms of a labor movement culture. I've had so many conversations with folks over the years who've talked about the alienation they feel, who talk about the lack of community they feel, and they start talking about the things that we need to deal with that. And a lot of times they're describing what around here would be associated with church. Church plays a lot of those roles for folks. And so for a lot of folks in places like Alabama, if you want to have community, if you want to have a bowling league, or if you want to have childcare, if you want to have a Wednesday night supper, those kinds of things, like, you're probably going to the evangelical church.
Right.
And that may be your best option, right? In terms of looking for that belonging and looking for that community support. And to their credit, the churches can provide that to some degree. Obviously in a very exclusionary way, it's not open to everybody, for sure, depending on the church. But, that's just something that really resonated with me, that I've heard those conversations from so many people for so many years, that there is almost a spiritual yearning, I think, that folks feel and need that.
Yeah, I think everyone has been told that whatever they're feeling is whatever they're dealing with in life is their fault. We basically have individualized blame for collective problems, and I think in our environment today, that community that people get from churches, part of that used to be found also in union halls and in that sort of environment, more secular, more politicized environment. Obviously, I think a more engaged civil society is probably a good thing for the left. I think even if people are getting it from churches, like there's still like an area there that we could move in and politicize. Like, if anything, I think the bigger danger is obviously just people feeling totally detached and atomized from each other. But obviously, the way a lot of churches are in the U.S., they're basically vehicles for the political right, which is just crazy if you think about even the history of evangelicalism in the U.S. I mean, this was some of the strongest voices against slavery and for radical abolition. Came from the church and came from teachings that today you could say kind of evolved in a certain way into evangelicalism. And it's only in the last 40, 50 years that we associate it with the political right. But now, I mean, it is very hard to separate. Obviously, a battle needs to be waged among leftists that are religious to reclaiming a different kind of view of Christianity and a different structure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have to be organizing in those spaces, and where those spaces are building community and exist as communities. Some of us are already part of those communities and need to be organizing inside of them if that's appropriate. It's not a field we should totally abandon by any means. I think there is a tendency among some folks on the left, quote unquote, for various reasons, some good reasons, to really shy away from organized religion and from faith-based communities. And I think we do so at our own peril. I don't think we should totally abandon that sphere. There are just too many folks involved with too many different perspectives, working class brothers and sisters that we just cannot afford to not engage with and have community with and conversations with. But there was a couple other things that you mentioned that stood out in terms of talking about the violent history of class struggle in the United States. I'm reminded that Jacob and I attended the Alabama AFL-CIO convention a couple weeks ago. And Cecil Roberts was there, the international president of the United Mine Workers of America, and he gave a, rousing speech as he typically does. And really, the speech was all about the Battle of Blair Mountain. It was about May 1. It was about that really violent, ugly history. It was about the Ludlow massacre in Colorado. And I thought it was, interesting that, like an establishment union kind of figure at a very establishment kind of meeting would go there, and I appreciated it, frankly. I thought it was very appropriate and needed to revive that kind of history and bring that history back into the consciousness of folks, especially a room full of people who are leaders, ostensibly, at least on paper. And so that's really important. And that's just, it just came to mind, as something that stood out.
Yeah, and
that's history. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, and I was just going to say, Bhaskar, I know that you told me you're going to have to run about the bottom of the hour, so yeah, you can respond to that, and we'll let you go. Really appreciate your time and making time for us.
No, of course. I was glad to take part, and obviously, what you guys are doing, what the Valley Labor Report is doing, I think is just like it's really important. I think not just for the people you're reaching today, but I think it sets an example about what other people can be doing all around the country in different areas and contexts. And I think this is the kind of network that we need. Like, I always thought that what Jacqueline was doing at a certain level was a national / international, like a very ideological and intellectual project. We were trying to make ideas accessible to ordinary people, but fundamentally, I think it had limits. And I think if I were to put my effort into a new media project down the road or kind of do it all over again, I think it would be something that speaks, I think, in a slightly more accessible parlance from the very beginning, and maybe was more rooted in the local level. So I think you're providing a really good example for lots of people, and I hope the fundraiser goes well. I myself will be making a small donation, and I hope anyone still up and listening or catching the recorded stream later does the same.
All right, appreciate it. Bhaskar Sunkara, President of the Nation, founder of Jacobin Magazine. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, really means a lot. As a big fan of your work and Jacobin and the Nation both, thank you so much for your time and for your kind words. Really do appreciate that.
Great. Take care, guys.
Yep, you too.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.